Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into a truly unique source. It's a personal memoir shared with the BBC's WWII People's War Archive.
Yeah, and this isn't that sort of grand strategy, top-down view of history, is it?
Not at all. It's 6 years of global conflict, seen entirely through the eyes of one man, James Palmer, a British guy just turning 21 in July 1939 when he got his call-up papers.
And became what they called a militia boy.
Right.
And that shift, from the big picture to this intensely personal view, that's really what makes this deep dive so compelling, I think.
Exactly. We're focusing on his lived experience, the moments that shaped him, from his childhood in working-class Manchester right through to the very, very end of the war.
It's quite a journey.
It really is. So our mission here is to trace that journey, pulling out the specific observations, the feelings, those little details that bring this massive historical event down to a human scale. We'll follow him from the streets of home to battlefields across Europe, Africa, Asia. Okay, let's unpack this story.
Sounds good. Where do we start?
So, James Palmer. Born into poverty in home Manchester back in 1918. His early childhood sounds like it had moments of real happiness, didn't it? Almost idyllic. He talks about make-believe and fantasy.
It did, yeah. But that innocence, well, it didn't last long. It was quickly overshadowed by the hungry 30s, that era of mass unemployment.
Oh, right.
He describes his father being out of work and just that constant struggle for families like theirs. It was grim.
And then a major turning point for him. Around age 12, his mother passes away. He reflects on that as the moment his childhood just ended, stepping over the threshold into reality, realizing life wasn't, as he put it, a bed of roses.
Yeah, and there's this really poignant self-reproach, too, isn't there? Feeling he hadn't truly grasped her suffering.
Yes, and it sounds like that shared grief, well, it really forged a powerful, close bond with his father afterwards.
Absolutely. But what's striking, though, is that even amidst the hardship, he talks about the Saturday night pub brawls, the tinkling of broken glass and all that, there is this incredibly strong sense of community.
Yes, he really emphasizes neighborly help. And he paints such a vivid picture of Mrs. Barraclough's sweet shop.
Ah, Mabara.
Yeah, the local gang hub, where kids could get hot drinks in winter, even buy fags on tick up to $1. He calls her this good old stick who offered kindness and guidance.
Those kinds of places were absolutely essential outlets, weren't they? Like lifelines.
Totally. He also describes the Boys Brigade as a second home during his adolescence.
Yeah.
It gave him activities, friendship, when things were maybe tough at home.
Yeah, provided structure, belonging, really important.
And you see his father's love and pride coming through.
Yeah.
Like pawning his best suit. His best suit.
Just to buy James secondhand football boots.
Exactly. So he could play for the school team. And walking all that way to Oldham to watch him play, making him feel like a real footballer.
That says a lot, doesn't it? The sacrifice his family's made.
It really does. Alongside that, James was also kind of developing a broader awareness of the world. After leaving school, he had a couple of early jobs. That brief, maybe less than diligent time as an office boy who went fishing instead.
Chuckles slightly. Yeah, I remember reading that.
And the shipping firm where he admits he occasionally fiddled the stamp book. Little acts of youthful rebellion, I suppose.
Right. But he was also reading quite widely, wasn't he? Authors like Upton Sinclair, Dickens, which started him thinking, as he put it, in an immature way, about social injustice and politics.
He mentions sensing a general unease, hearing about the Spanish Civil War, Mussolini, the word sanctions. The world stage was definitely getting darker just as he was coming of age.
Which leads us directly to that pivotal moment in his life.
His 21st birthday, July 1939. He wryly calls his call-up papers his passport to manhood. They arrived on the doorstep the same day as his traditional silver keys of the door.
Talk about timing.
Right. He wasn't exactly thrilled, apparently considered conscientious objection, but ultimately felt he lacked the guts, or maybe was too influenced by reading Kipling, he wasn't sure.
And he was part of the first militia, which was a relatively new concept then. The expectation was just 6-month service.
Yeah. He genuinely thought he'd be home for Christmas.
Amazing looking back.
That farewell at the station with his dad and Muriel, his girlfriend. It's so relatable and poignant. His dad's surprise at seeing him smoke, then that quiet gesture of handing over a packet of Woodbines.
Yeah, like an acceptance into adulthood almost, a passing of the torch.
Exactly. And for his father, being a WWII veteran himself, standing on that same platform.
Yeah.
It must have stirred up so many difficult memories.
Oh, undoubtedly. So they went off to Warminster for initial training during what became known as the Phony War.
Right. He describes the routine, the frustration, learning about guns that seemed not meant to be fired, but to be taken apart, oiled, put back together again.
Just endless drills. It was this strange period of waiting, this inactivity.
And there's that almost surreal anecdote, isn't there, about this runaway gun on the range interrupting a fox hunt.
Oh, yeah. Scarlet cuts, yelping dogs, a fox getting away, and this gun just blasting away randomly.
What a bizarre contrast.
Yeah.
Military activity and this sort of upper-class civilian life colliding.
It really highlights the strangeness of that time.
Mm-hmm.
Their social life, it sounds like, revolved around Ringwood Village and the Three Bells pub. He remembers the locals being very friendly, and the story about letting the monkeys loose in the tap room.
Oh, that. Just pure, silly, youthful antics, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Probably born out of boredom.
Had to be. All soldiers look alike in the dark, apparently.
He gets his first leave, gets engaged to Muriel, which sounds like a happy moment, a bit of normality.
Yeah.
But then there's this incredibly difficult visit to the parents of a friend who was killed in action, even though the friend was in a different squadron.
That must have been absolutely harrowing. He felt he'd done the wrong thing visiting them, didn't he?
Yes. He left with this distinct impression they felt it was unfair that their son had died and I had got off scot-free.
Wow. That kind of emotional burden, even indirectly, it just sticks with you.
Coming back to camp after that, he describes feeling unsettled and frustrated. The phony war just dragged on, and the impatience grew among the men.
Yeah, he captures that feeling perfectly. If we're going to have a war, let's get on with it.
Of course, he acknowledges later that ignorance was bliss. He had no idea what was coming.
And they wouldn't be ignorant for much longer. The sudden order came. Draft to France.
And for men, on, 16 pence a day? 1 shilling and 6 pence.
Yeah, tiny amount.
This was a financial problem. Many, like James, didn't have the train fare home for one last visit.
That's where that truly touching story comes in, about the 2 old ladies who ran the sweet shop.
Oh, yeah, that's lovely.
They found out and insisted on giving James and his friends a £1 note, each which was a significant sum then,
A fortune.
making them promise not to go to France without going home first. He calls it a cheap price for the happiness they were able to experience. It forced them to confront the real possibility they might not see home again.
What kindness.
And the lack of security back then, it was astounding. He says the whole village knew they were going, even where they were likely to land in France.
Incredible. And they ended up traveling in cattle trucks.
Just like his dad had in WWII. That parallel must have been chilling.
And the illusion of peace, well, it was shattered brutally, instantly, on that train journey.
Strafing.
Yeah, an enemy plane. He describes all hell broke loose, just sheer panic, flinging themselves on the floor, men firing wildly, nearly a stampede.
That was their baptism of fire, as he called it. And he says, plainly, no one found the experience a pleasant one. Understatement of the century, I imagine.
No kidding. Passing through bomb stations had a sobering effect. Then came the reconnaissance mission tension, exhaustion. He and his companion were so fatigued they just dropped off into a deep sleep right during the planning section.
Just couldn't stay awake.
The next morning was their first proper action. He describes the noise tanks, guns, the chattering of machine guns, the crump of artillery shells landing nearby.
Yeah.
Seeing enemy tanks and infantry trying to cross the river, their own tanks providing fire support, witnessing casualties. His friend Nick being carried away, injured and unconscious.
The reality of it hitting home.
Definitely. As they retreated south, there's this striking detail. As the gun sounds lessened, the singing of the birds returned.
What a contrast, nature reclaiming the silence.
And he notes forced laughter as the tension eased slightly. They reached a forward position where men were frantically digging slit trenches, their Bren guns pointed back towards the river they'd just fled.
Preparing for the worst.
They encountered French soldiers huddled in ditches, looking defeated.
Ah.
And then the refugees.
Yes. Initially a trickle, then just a flood, clogging the roads south.
Abandoned vehicles with mattresses on the roof, possessions dumped everywhere, ditches just full of frightened people.
And then that utterly horrific scene at the blocked crossroads, the planes strafing the refugees.
It's just awful to even read. He describes it like looking down on the stage of a theater, seeing men, women, and children crumpled, vehicles bursting into flames.
Hearing the screams and moans of the wounded, his reaction is so raw, so visceral. This wasn't war, this was bloody murder.
Yeah, he saw there were no rules in this Holocaust. That image. It really sticks with you, doesn't it?
Devastating. Utterly devastating. They arrived in a deserted, derelict village to try and reorganize, facing a hostile reception from the few locals left.
Right. Despite the grim atmosphere, they'd set up HQ, checked vehicles, managed a few brief hours of sleep.
And then they received only 10 new tanks, not the 30 they were expecting.
And prepared to attack Abbeville. He describes that horrible feeling of moving back towards the river again, his mind clouded by memories of our last visit. You can just feel the dread.
The retreat continued, didn't it? Towards Rouen, still clogged with refugees, scenes of devastation, shallow graves by the roadside. He starkly says, Dante's Inferno could be no more horrific than this.
Blimey. After abandoning most of their worn-out tanks, they were bundled into lorries, traveling light. He notes their casualties were actually minimal in those 5 days, but the men were utterly exhausted and fatigued.
Understandably so. So, after the chaos and the horror of France, his unit's journey took this completely unexpected turn, didn't it? Sent them east.
Yeah, a long way east. From Egypt, they sailed towards India, then were meant for Java, but a quick change of plan diverted them again.
And they landed in Burma, February 1942.
The scene in Rangoon sounds somber and foreboding. Deserted docks, silent cranes. They had to unload their own tanks because the local labor had just vanished, fled.
And they quickly found out the British Army there was in, well, a dire state, totally unequipped for jungle warfare.
Right, like the 17th Indian Division trained for the desert, suddenly thrust into the jungle.
While the Japanese, on the other hand, were masters of the jungle, using infiltration, outflanking tactics.
It sounds like the British forces were constantly being outmaneuvered, constantly surprised.
The situation became absolutely critical at the Sitang River Bridge. It was the only access for that 17th Indian Division, and it was under constant air attack.
Then the Berlin River defense collapsed, cutting off the 17th Division completely.
Which led to that impossible decision to blow the bridge to stop the Japanese advance.
Effectively abandoning the 17th Division on the other side.
A terrible choice to have to make. And then, tragically, their own planes mistakenly bombed the 17th as they fought their way back towards the river. Friendly fire adding to the disaster.
Just awful. But then, what he calls an amazing thing happened.
Yeah.
The Japanese unexpectedly paused their attack to build a new bridge further upriver.
Really? Why would they do that?
He doesn't know, but it allowed a large number of the 17th Division to swim across the Sitang. He described them arriving nearly naked, and none of them had rifles. A brief, unexpected window of escape.
Incredible. But Rangoon still had to be evacuated, right?
Yes. A full-scale retreat north towards India began. And this wasn't some tactical withdrawal, it was a desperate flight for survival.
They had to destroy everything. They couldn't carry docks, warehouses, food, surplus vehicles.
He describes taking essential supplies, tins of fruit, rice, stuffed into stockings, using an extra gas cape, each as a makeshift tent. His line is stark. Everything that stood up had to be knocked down. Scorched earth.
They moved out of a blazing Rangoon towards the Prome Road. Their first skirmish with Japanese infantry near Pegu was devastating.
He notes the devastating mortar and heavy machine gun fire, and that grim reality hit them. Their tanks were pretty much ineffective in jungle against that kind of close-quarters fighting.
And the Japanese quickly cut the Prome Road, didn't they? At a spot they called the Red Track. Set up a roadblock, trapped the whole retreating column.
Yeah, they were stranded there for 2 days, digging in, while the tanks finally managed to clear the block after heavy fighting.
And that basically set the pattern for the rest of the retreat, didn't it?
Absolutely. Splitting into smaller groups because of the jungle density, constantly facing roadblocks, attacks from the flanks with hand grenades, mortars, and small arms fire. Just relentless pressure.
The physical and mental toll must have been immense, increasing tiredness, jumpiness, equipment lost, or just shredded. He says many had no shirts left at all.
Dysentery was rampant. He describes craving sleep so badly they were stumbling along with our eyes closed. Just pure exhaustion.
And there's that harrowing incident at the Yananyang oil field.
Oh yeah, the burning derricks everywhere. One toppled, hit their tank.
Caused a terrific explosion. He survived with burns through his hands and arms, but his driver
Was engulfed in flames. Just a moment of random, terrifying luck or lack of it.
Finally, after nearly 800 miles and over 4 months of this hellish retreat, they reached the Chinwin River.
He says they had walked, staggered, stumbled, and crawled to get there. Crossing it brought a sense of safety, but they were utterly exhausted, bruised, battered.
His summary is so stark. We left Burma a beaten and demoralized fighting force. He compares it directly to the Brest evacuation back in France, another desperate escape.
So after that brutal, almost unbelievable trek through Burma, he describes arriving in the Chin Hills, finding other refugees already there, a sense of relief, maybe?
Briefly, perhaps.
Hmm.
But right as they thought they were nearing safety in India, they got the dreadful news. A cholera outbreak.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Halted their movement completely, just stuck, waiting again after everything they'd been through.
General Alexander visited them there, didn't he? Thanking them for, quote, saving India.
Yeah, but he was also brutally blunt, stated they were now useless as a fighting force and desperately needed rest. Couldn't mince words, I suppose.
They were eventually moved by goods train across India to Dond in the Deccan. He describes their shocking state with diarrhea, utterly depleted.
But the kindness of the infantry lads already there sounds truly remarkable.
It really does. Giving up their tents, providing rations, bringing them meals while they just slept, basically nursing them back to some semblance of health.
That camaraderie, eh? After finally getting some rest and medical care, they were moved again, this time to Mesopotamia in Iraq.
Right. He mentions the boredom setting in again, the inevitable rumors about their next posting.
And his own strong feeling that he did not want to go back to the desert campaign. Those early days were still fresh in his mind. Understandable.
He contrasts the initial illusion of the Garden of Eden scenery near Basra with the grim reality of Iraq. The dirt, the squalor, the beggars everywhere. Baghdad was busy, but the poverty was inescapable.
Their journey continued, through Palestine and then north to Aleppo in Syria. And here they were given this truly bizarre, unconventional task.
Setting up dummy tank units near the Turkish border.
Yeah. 3-ton lorries with cardboard superstructures and dummy guns sticking out, designed purely to look like tanks from the air. Deception tactics.
He speculates it was a diversion, maybe for the upcoming invasion of Sicily. Plausible.
And the anecdote that just encapsulates the absurdity of it all. An unidentified plane drops a bomb on one of these dummy units.
Right. They hit the deck, expecting the worst and nothing.
The bomb was made of wood.
Wood. He says wooden bombs and dummy tanks. What a sense of humor. After Burma, I guess you'd find dark humor in almost anything.
You'd have to, wouldn't you? After that strange interlude, they moved to Sidon in Lebanon. And this, he says, was the best campsite they ever had.
Bit of respite.
Definitely. Lush and green. A calm, clear, warm sea. It was a period of genuine, much-needed rest and convalescence.
They lived like lords, got special rations, and the cooks even built this ingenious oven out of rocks, clay, and an oil drum to bake white bread.
Amazing ingenuity. A taste of real comfort after years of hardship.
Trips to Beirut were a highlight, too. He describes it as a marvelous city, clean and well-kept, with friendly people. This period must have felt like a different universe after Burma and Iraq.
A necessary pause, but of course that rest couldn't last forever.
No. He felt the time of playing soldiers was over, with the invasion of Sicily and Europe imminent. They moved to the Canal Zone to wait.
Feeling resigned to our eventual fate, and very apprehensive. They even trained in waterproofing tanks, sure they were going to hit the beaches somewhere soon.
But their next major theater turned out to be Italy. They arrived and were soon thrown into the preparation for the third attack on Cassino, May 1944.
He describes the immense bombing that reduced the town to just a mass of rubble, utter devastation.
And despite that, the German paratroopers holding Monastery Hill fought with fanatical fury from deep within the rocky terrain, dug in deep.
The sheer amount of rubble and the steep, difficult terrain made it incredibly tough for tanks and armor, impossible almost.
It was brutal street fighting, wasn't it? And fighting on those slopes where troops were just pinned down by murderous fire.
Supply lines were a nightmare, relying on pack mules or parachute drops that often landed right in enemy territory.
He notes the diverse Allied troops there too, the Polish Corps, the French Gooms, describing the Gooms as wild men from the Atlas Mountains who preferred to use their knives rather than guns and always had their womenfolk with them. Quite a picture.
It really paints this vivid, overwhelming picture of the battle, the chaos, the noise, the sheer terror. Screaming and dying, men killed by their own allies in the confusion. He calls it a cauldron of fire.
And there's that specific, chilling anecdote about the German Tiger tank hidden.
Oh yeah, bricked up inside a house, just poking its gun out, firing around and pulling back in. Lethal. Urban warfare at its most brutal and cunning.
The psychological state of the soldiers after that battle, he describes it so powerfully. They saw faces blackened, eyes glazed, men staring and twitching.
Tank crews just slumped over their controls. Men sick and men were moaning, sobbing and crying, cowering behind heaps of bricks, just broken.
And he reflects on his own survival amidst all this devastation. I was all in one piece, so it couldn't be all bad. A very bleak kind of optimism.
I had to find something, I suppose. The push up the Lyra Valley was slow after Cassino, wasn't it? Hampered by extensive minefields and the German defensive positions like the Hitler Line.
Then came the Bitter Campaign in the Apennines. He called it wicked country, totally unsuited to tank warfare.
Yeah, he explains the German lines weren't continuous fronts like in WWII, but these isolated strongpoints on high ground made every advance incredibly costly and difficult, especially for armor trying to support infantry.
He captures that constant anxiety of being under fire so well, seeing the flash from the enemy gun, hearing the whistle of the shell getting louder, seeing the plume of smoke where it lands, then the clump and thump nearby.
Always waiting for the next one. It wasn't big pitch battle so much as this continuous probing forward, always under threat, always losing men.
And then, perhaps one of the most deeply disturbing anecdotes in the entire memoir, the fight in a cemetery near Urbino.
Oh, God, yes, that one.
Fighting from behind gravestones, just 25 yards apart from the enemy. He describes the noise, the chaos, and the horrifying surreal sight of shells hitting the ground and sending human bones and complete skeletons flying through the air.
Wounded men lying amongst long-dead human skeletons, just unimaginable. He stood there watching, frozen, unbelieving.
It's an image that's just impossible to shake. Haunting.
And the psychological toll just continued to build, didn't it? Moving into the Po Valley offered the relief of open country, finally, but exhaustion and depression set in as winter arrived.
Cold, wet, and miserable. Mud everywhere, with seemingly no end in sight to the fighting.
This sounds like the absolute peak of his personal psychological strain. He describes increasing nervousness, jumpiness, paranoia, this awful premonition that now he was getting closer to the end of his active service, his luck would run out.
That must have been terrifying, feeling like your number's finally up after surviving so much. He felt a physical reaction to the fear, describing how he would crouch behind the slits of the tank and pray.
And he shares that particularly painful moment, watching the scout car bringing his relief, having to run a gauntlet of fire just to reach his forward post.
He says, I cried, I moaned, I prayed, and I cursed. You can just feel the sheer mental exhaustion and terror in that line, the breaking point almost.
So after enduring the absolute grinder of Italy, James is eventually transported back towards England for demobilization. The end is in sight.
But not quite yet. Before heading straight home, they stop in Naples.
Yeah.
And what he describes there is just shocking.
Yeah, a city crawling with deserters from both Allied armies who apparently controlled everything, including a rampant black marketeering, a breakdown of order.
He saw corruption and vice far worse than he'd seen in Rome. Pitched battles between the two factions of deserters, areas they openly controlled. It sounds like utter lawlessness.
And the impact on the locals. He writes how the Napolis had lost all their dignity, people openly offering children for sale. The city was in a dreadful state of filth. There was a typhoid epidemic. Just a stark picture of the war's devastating impact on a civilian population.
He finally arrives back in England at Catterick Camp. And even the bureaucracy sounds like a final challenge, sorting out his paybook.
Oh yeah, with all those different currencies. France, Egypt, Burma, India, Iraq, Syria, Italy. He says it needed a computer to sort it all out, I can imagine.
And amidst all this admin, he's grappling with how the war has changed him inside. He worries he's become hard and at times cynical, and what that might mean for his relationship with Muriel after years apart, that fear of not fitting back in.
A common worry for returning soldiers, I think. But the reunion with Muriel at London Road Station sounds like a powerful emotional release.
It does. He says, all my aches and loneliness were over, with tears of happiness. It's that moment you've been hoping for throughout his whole story.
He spends time catching up with friends and family, but finds it incredibly difficult to talk about his experiences. It was too painful, I just wanted to forget.
Understandable. He feels amazed that he survived unscathed physically, but he clearly acknowledges the lasting scars deep in his mind, the invisible wounds.
Now, there's a section in the memoir that actually places a truly horrific experience after the Italian campaign. But before his final demobilization logistics get sorted, he finds himself in Germany in 1945.
Right, that's crucial. His unit moves north into Germany as part of the final push, but for them it becomes a kind of spectator phase.
Yeah, he says they were mere spectators, having not even so much as fired a Bren gun during this final stage of the fighting as the Third Reich collapsed.
He describes entering Hamburg, calling it horrific, a scene of massive pulverization, just a rubble heap, clear evidence of the firestorms, Total destruction.
And there's this surreal detail he notes amidst all that devastation, zoo animals still somehow present.
Yeah. A giraffe popped its head over a wall, an ostrich strutted past, and an elephant was even being used to help pull down unsafe buildings. Life in these strange forms surviving amidst total ruin.
He saw destroyed villages, flattened crops, roads clogged with civilian refugees carrying their few remaining belongings, thousands of German prisoners waiting to be collected, overturned anti-tank guns everywhere. Signs of capitulation.
But nothing, absolutely nothing, could prepare him for Belsen concentration camp.
No. He admits to initial skepticism about the stories he'd heard, the rumors, but arriving there felt like arriving at the gates of hell itself.
They had to be decontaminated for typhus immediately. The smell was awful and nauseating. He describes the windowless huts, the bodies piled on bunks, naked and filthy, some moaning but often too weak to cry.
Rats, as big as rabbits, gnawing on corpses. Demented inmates wandering around. That image of the woman nursing a dead rat.
Horrifying. The difficulty distinguishing the living from the dead. Seeing bodies being rescued from mass burial pits where they'd been dumped alive.
He saw the SS guards, including women like Irma Green, paraded in chains. He describes the gas chamber and the incinerator choked with the charred remains of human bones.
Local German officials were forced to witness it all, forced to assist, digging latrines. Their claims of ignorance, oh, the area was restricted, we didn't know, just rang completely hollow against the stark evidence.
Yeah, the medical experimental unit, the gas chambers, the incinerator. And that chilling detail of the commandant having a lampshade in his office made from human skin. Proof of utter barbarity.
He conveys the profound physical and emotional sickness it induced in him. Sickened as I had never been sickened before. Couldn't eat for nearly a week. It made him question everything.
Was this what the war had been all about? He felt the world was mad, that Belsen was Armageddon? It throws the entire preceding 6 years of fighting and suffering into this brutal, horrifying new perspective. What were they fighting against? This.
And even after the German surrender, the chaos wasn't over. In the summer aftermath, he describes displaced persons forming revenge units.
Yeah, leading to mass looting, pillaging, and rapes. Vengeance raids on German farms, burning farms, slaughtered cattle, women raped. He calls it uncontrolled sadism, the breakdown continuing.
His job then was as Corporal IC reinforcement deliveries at Filling-Bostel, driving lorries across northern Germany. Still seeing the aftermath of battle and the pervasive black market where German marks were useless, but the real currency was soap, cigarettes, chocolate.
So from that grim scene in Germany, the memoir returns to the final steps of his journey home. Demobilization at Ashton Barracks near Manchester. Almost there.
And even here, there's more bureaucracy and frustration. He describes his baffling train journey north to Glasgow, just a hand-in kit.
Only to be put straight back on a slow train south again. He felt like they were deliberately delaying his demob, messing them about.
Arriving late at Ashton Barracks, he's told to wait until morning to be processed. And this is where the accumulated frustration just boils over.
Yeah, he recounts how they played hell, basically refused to wait, and successfully demanded immediate demob processing. Told the staff to stuff them, can't blame them really.
Not after 6 years. The demobilization process itself sounds like this efficient yet impersonal machine, handing in pay books with all those currencies, getting advance pay, coupons, a ration book, supplies like cigarettes and chocolate in a box, the standard issue demob package.
Choosing civilian clothes from racks of suits, he notes they weren't bad. Getting a shirt, underwear, socks, shoes, tie, hat, all the bits and pieces.
And finally, receiving that discharge book, he describes the feeling, we were now civilians, the moment itself.
The very last leg of the journey home. A taxi from the station, a bit of an argument over the fare.
And him watching the final part, you can almost feel the anticipation.
The arrival home is incredibly moving. The joyous welcome from his old dog Taffy, just going mad and licking his face.
And his dad's tearful reaction. He notes the neighbors coming around bringing cigarettes and reflects that people are not like that nowadays, connecting that community spirit back to the shared experience of poverty he grew up with, that bond.
His dad taking the day off work is such a simple, touching detail, isn't it? Speaks volumes about his love and relief.
The reunion with Muriel at her factory sounds hectic and pretty wild until they manage to escape the crowds.
He makes that difficult but necessary visit to his dead friend's parents, telling them what happened. Still feeling their unspoken sense that it was unfair their son died and he survived. That survivor's guilt.
He spends the rest of the week seeing people, appreciating the kindness. but feels this deepening depression setting in. He didn't want to go back into the military, but felt there was no answer to it, no future for me. That post-war uncertainty.
And there's that surprising, almost darkly comic detail about their wedding night being interrupted by an air raid, a wedding night with a difference. Even the peace wasn't quite peaceful yet.
The post-wedding parting at the station when he had to report back briefly was the worst of all, leaving him with that awful feeling that no one expected him to come back this time, like he pushed his luck too far already.
And the memoir ends with one final mishap. Muriel getting on the wrong train after his final demob, ending up lost in Newcastle while trying to meet him, sobbing her heart out.
Ugh, nightmare, before they finally reunited properly.
He concludes with his reflections on arriving home for good, the start of a new life. Hope mixed with that nagging fear, and that central, profound question of whether humanity had learned anything at all from the experience.
It's such a raw, unflinching account, isn't it? It doesn't romanticize war one bit. It just lays bare the exhaustion, the fear, the moments of absurdity, the bureaucracy, and ultimately, the absolute horror he witnessed.
Yeah. Wow. You can just see how that journey would leave those invisible scars, even if he came home physically unscathed, as he put it.
Absolutely. From that kid in poverty in Manchester to a young man thrown into multiple theaters of war, witnessing the retreat in France, the nightmare of Burma, the relentless grind of Italy, and then the unspeakable atrocity of Belsen.
Exactly. This memoir really reminds us that behind the maps and the grand strategies were individuals like James Palmer, navigating not just battles, but moments of unexpected kindness, flashes of dark humor, periods of soul-crushing boredom, and profound moral shock. Coming home wasn't an instant fix, it was just the start of processing all of that.
His story really highlights the resilience of the human spirit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But also the immense lasting cost of conflict. And his final question, it just hangs there in the air.
It really does. After all that suffering, after seeing the absolute worst humanity is capable of at Belsen, he asks, would this world of peace be a better place? Would the last 6 years have taught mankind a lesson?
A question that feels, well, it feels as urgent today as it must have done then. What do you think?